Start presenting really quickly, just a little bit about the challenge itself. So this session is part of the New Jersey Student Climate Challenge. This is a challenge that's put on by Sustainable Jersey and the Drum Thwackett Foundation with generous support from Atlantic City Electric and Exelon. So today we have Rachel Schwam here, who is an associate professor at Rutgers University. We're very excited. We have a long title, but the title gets straight to the point, right? So how can we help people change their behavior to help solve climate change, which is a very key component of helping solve the challenge. Just a little background on the challenge for those that have not heard yet. It is open to students in grades 6 through 12th, and that is public schools in New Jersey. The teams of students should be from 2 to 12 just to make sure it's manageable, and you can have more than one group of students per school. The big crux, the thing of the whole thing we're doing here is to complete a school or community project that addresses either the human causes of climate change or the impacts that it has on the environment. And students will showcase their projects in the form of a digital story video. If you want to learn more about how to make a digital story, we have a YouTube video on our playlist for this challenge. And that will be able to be seen on the bit.ly link that Andrea should be putting in the chat quite a few times during this, because that's where you can find everything. This is just a timeline of how the challenge will be put on. So we are wrapping up our educational sessions. We only have, I believe, 3 student ones left and 2 PD sessions. So we're wrapping that up this month. And then, this will be the time where students will be brainstorming and working on their projects and kind of gathering all that information for their submissions to be due in April 1st. In May is when we'll announce the finalists. And then in June, we will host an award ceremony at the Drum Thwackett House. Governor Phil Murphy and First Lady Tammy Murphy will be in attendance. And then we have down here the awards for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place. These are grants that will be awarded to your schools for sustainability projects to kind of, improve on the project that you did for the challenge. Great, so we are going to hand it over to Rachel. I will stop sharing my screen so you can share yours.
Okay. Share mine. Hi, welcome everybody, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to I was saying to Joanna that I'm happy to kind of have a different audience to talk to and try to communicate some of the stuff we know. And so I thought today, I kind of thought about after talking to some folks about what they thought might be helpful to this audience, that I would focus on just kind of 5 tips for behavior change programs to help solve climate change. So, and kind of just the most basic, seeing I only kind of get to talk to you once, kind of the most important things I would want you to know. And so just to introduce myself and kind of how I have come to this, I grew up in Massachusetts on Cape Cod and was very interested in the environment. My dad was a fisherman and my mom was a special ed teacher. And I went to a public high school. And then I went on to Syracuse University in New York, where I studied biological and environmental sciences and English. I went straight into my master's at Duke at that point, where I had a concentration in resource economics and policy. And then I went to work for 4 years in Boston, kind of helping programs, utility programs to help businesses and homes save energy. And then I went back to school at Michigan State University, where I got my PhD in sociology and a focus on environmental science and policy. And then I got hired at Rutgers, very luckily, and am an associate professor there. I'm in the Department of Human Ecology, which is a department of environmental social scientists And our undergraduate major is environmental policy, institutions, and behavior. So if you like this kind of stuff that I'm talking about here, or you have a student that likes this stuff, this is the kind of major they could do in undergraduate. One thing that kind of I want, folks to understand is that, we know a lot. Well, we're learning more every day, but we can study society and the social world the same way that, I think a lot of high schoolers end up studying cells in biology, or, or studying chemistry, and that we can know things about how society works. And so the social sciences are the systematic study of humans and society. And so, like I said, I got my PhD in sociology, and that's focused on studying society and groups of people. But there's all kinds of social sciences that this presentation will draw off of, like psychology and anthropology, in human geography and political science and economics. And these are all perspectives on human behavior. And all of them actually have perspectives on how we get people to change human behavior as well. And so the social sciences can use things like social network analysis, which studies the connections between people, or, big data like the US Census, or, now we have all this data from our credit cards and our social networking sites, right? Or we can do systematic interviews where we ask a number of people of a population the same questions, surveys that are delivered by computer or by phone. We do experiments, where we bring people into a lab and give them a situation, or we try to study people. I just finished a study with 130 households where they were in their homes, and we were collecting all kinds of data and giving them information to try to help them conserve energy, food, and water. So the stuff that I'm going to talk to you about today is built on these social sciences, and comes from these kinds of experiments, and data that tells us kind of what helps people change their behavior. So the first step I wanted, to kind of help, for kind of helping students that are interested in targeting, changing behaviors to help solve climate change, is to choose your behavior carefully, that and target behaviors that are going to have a significant impact on greenhouse gas emissions. I often find, I work with a group of folks that are the paper I'm going to show you a graph from, and we're always kind of struggling with, people really focusing on certain actions, but like which are all, there's kind of a feeling of like, a small reduction in greenhouse gas emissions is good, right? It can keep you away from an edge. So, every incremental behavior change is good. But on the other hand, if we're going to put some time and resources into changing people's behaviors, we want to be picking behaviors that have a high impact, so that and drawing the connection between that behavior change and how it's going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate change. So basically, when you look at kind of in the US, approximately 30, and these numbers are a little bit old now, so they're kind of always changing because of changing dimensions of other countries' use and things, but direct energy use by households, in the sense of our electricity and natural gas, and driving our cars, right, is about 38% of overall US carbon dioxide emissions in 2005. And that was about 8% of global emissions, and larger than the emissions of any country except for China, as far as from the residential kind of segment of the population. And so when you think about that, that's a chunk. So that's why we think about like, how can we change people's behavior and maybe get at some of this, right? And so that's the first kind of factor you want to think about when you're choosing your kind of reduction. And so that 8% though is made up of a bunch of different uses, which I'll talk about next. But there's kind of the potential of what is being emitted by these behaviors as far as carbon dioxide equivalents. And then there's also part of, with the behavior you're targeting is how many people can you get to undertake this behavior, right? And so the folks I work with call this behavioral plasticity, how kind of plastic, how changeable is people's behavior in the sense of how many people who don't do this behavior could be encouraged to do it. And so there you have to start thinking about like, okay, so the people who take public transportation, if you're focusing on getting people to purchase electric vehicles, like there's people who take public transportation, so those aren't part of your population. And then there might be, also a whole segment of your population who like just simply can't afford electric vehicles, or there's no charging, there's no place they would be able to charge it, right? And so you've got a certain segment of the population that you can target and get to change. And then the idea about behavioral plasticity as well is that the idea that, that based on past studies, you can kind of know how effective you can get a program to work. So, oh, okay, they ran a program where they gave rebates to buy Energy Star refrigerators and 50% of people took advantage of that, right? And so you kind of know like, okay, we can probably get like 50% by doing that. And so it's kind of having a better understanding and accounting for when you're undertaking an effort, how likely you are to change people's behavior. So when you think about these things, those are the kind of two dimensions. And so what we call that dark blue line there is, we call it the reasonably achieved emissions reductions. And I put I spelled that wrong, but should be reductions, and the typo, but it's the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that you could potentially reduce, kind of time multiplied by the percent of people that, or the percentage of that total potential that you think you can get. So that light blue line is just the potential emissions. So something like carpooling, like if everybody could carpool, there's actually a pretty good potential emissions reduction there. But then we know, because of all kinds of logistical issues of scheduling and, whatever it is, that, generally you can only get so many people to carpool. And so that, gets you that dark blue line. And so, thinking about kind of the potential emissions reductions, but then also how many people you can get to undertake this action gives you a better understanding of what kinds of household actions you might want to target, right? So here, the potential emissions, the greatest potential emissions reduction comes from fuel efficient vehicles, so getting people to get rid of their SUVs and buy something that's more fuel efficient, right? To buy a hybrid or electric vehicle. And you can see here that, you can still get, that's still, they think that you can get a big chunk that, about half of the people, half of the emissions could be actually reached by giving, running programs and helping people buy more fuel efficient vehicles. And so when you look through, you can also see things that end up, with very low dark blue lines. So, but on the other hand, sometimes they're fairly cheap and inexpensive to address. So water heater temperature for example, which is just setting the the temperature on your water heater where it, just kind of sits lower than what it is. And actually, a lot of people have discussed, can we just get manufacturers to change that baseline so that when you buy your water heater, it's just set at a lower temperature, and that you have to go actually make it hotter than rather us getting everybody to go turn it down, right? And but some of these things have low flow shower heads. So some of these, this is when you're looking at low flow shower heads, what you're really, the energy savings are in the water heating savings. And so it's low, it's kind of limited, right? But these are kind of have much smaller impacts than, focusing on some of these larger behaviors, such as getting people to buy Energy Star air conditioners, or do weatherization in their home, so insulation and things like that. This study, where these numbers came from, kind of now, I think I was saying, 2009, and the numbers have gotten much better, and maybe you're all aware of the greenhouse gas emissions embedded in our food system. And there's a lot more focus on this now. And so as far as those were direct energy uses by households, but then there's indirect energy uses through household, which are kind of our food greenhouse gas emissions. And so another area of, high impact focus that there's, I think, still a lot of discussion about how much we can influence people's behaviors around eating high impact animal foods. But you can see here that sheep and beef are the highest greenhouse gas impacts, poultry is lower. And then if we're on here, things like legumes and beans would be even lower. And so getting people to shift, to the left for their food choices is another area people are focusing on to reduce greenhouse gas climate change that has significant effects. So, so choose kind of behaviors that are contributing significantly to greenhouse gas emissions, and that you actually, people can actually change and will actually change, is the first tip. Tip 2, I would say, is to identify your target population. So kind of once you know that area of, okay, I want to get people to buy more fuel efficient vehicles, or I want people to eat less meat, you're going to identify your target population, the barriers and the benefits, right? So whether that's thinking about, are you targeting people who own their homes so that they can make investments versus renters, those who have cars versus those who don't? Are you, on the food side, sneeze. Are you targeting students that are eating in a cafeteria? Are you trying to target what people are buying for groceries? You're trying to target what they're eating out, And so thinking about that, about your population, and then identifying the barriers, so community-based social marketing focuses on identifying the barriers and the benefits. And so thinking about common barriers that come up is, limited resources as far as first costs, but also thinking about additional time it might take, additional effort, technological constraints, where, there's income. I know for a long time I got to work on incompatibility and lighting fixtures with dimmers and putting compact fluorescent lights in, not having a place to charge your electric vehicle, structural constraints as far as, your access to public transportation, or, alternatives, having food deserts, or, what you have available to purchase for low carbon foods. And then, other barriers are motivation, habitual routines that we have, lack of knowledge, um, lack, lack of, or other things that kind of like you have meaning from the way you do things now. So, Christmas and all its consumption, all its greenhouse gas emissions, um, is driven, by the kind of social meaning that it has as much as anything else. Um, and also competency of knowing how to do the alternative, right? Knowing how to compost, knowing how to prepare vegetarian food, and cook vegetarian food, all these kinds of things, right? Um, so, for example, you want people to walk and bike instead of taking short drives, right? And so if you target something where you're like, I want people to drive less. I understand when they're going far, they might have, they need to use a car, but these short drives, I want people to drive. And so you'd say, oh, well, potential benefits are, you get improved environmental benefits, lower direct air pollution and lower greenhouse gas emissions. They can save money on gas now that that's becoming more expensive. And there's all these physical and mental health benefits you get by, walking and biking. But, on the other hand, you have potential barriers. There might be unsafe crossings or intersections, bad weather that affects people's comfort, social norms. This is one for work, dress and work at school, right? Where you need to wear certain clothes and it's hard to bike to work in suits. This is my old boss in Boston actually put a whole shower. We had a whole shower and changing place because he liked to ride his bike to work. And so he kept a suit at work and rode, to work. Bike availability and, kind of whether you own a bike, have a place to store a bike if you're in an apartment, not feeling safe or unaware of the rules of the road, right? And kind of needing to know those competencies about, how to ride on in urban or suburban areas, and time constraints, right? That it's going to take longer to get to wherever you're going. And so these are all kinds of barriers that you need to recognize to get people, if you're going to want them to change their behavior. The whole goal of community-based social marketing is to kind of increase the realization of benefits, but to decrease those barriers, right? And to make this behavior easier and to recognize that it's not just information that people need, right? And so I think one trap that we fall into when we're trying to get people to change behavior is that we think of it as, that all they need, all people need is more information, that if they just knew that they would change their behavior, right? And so information is necessary for behavior change. It's one piece of it, but it's not enough to change behavior often. And my example, unfortunately, is, for myself, even for eating meat, for example, right? That I have known and studied all the environmental impacts of eating meat. I have friends that work on animal welfare issues, so I know a lot about that, and kind of how, and kind of all these societal issues, and the ethics, right? And I have continued to decrease the amount I eat of meat, but yet I still eat meat. And I actually sat on a panel once where it was run by like the Rutgers Vegan Students Society, and they said, how can people, do this and deal with this cognitive dissonance of knowing this is so bad, but continuing to do it? And I was like, I don't know, but I do, right? and there's, routines and there's preferences and all these things, right, that make it hard for behavior change. And for me, right, it's been just a long-term gradual behavior change. So sometimes understanding that things are not what we would call punctuated equilibrium, right? Or just kind of like an immediate change, but like more of a shift of people just do things less and less. You walk slight, you start replacing some of your drives with walks, right? And kind of bring that into that kind of behavioral change versus I think sometimes with a behavioral change program, we think we are going to give people information about how bad doing this is. We're going to tell them what they should do. And then they're just going to flip and do it, right? And there's so much more involved in how we behave that we need to help people more and also kind of, it's a kind of process, understand it as a change process. Okay, I should be getting done. So I mentioned that, from that, you need to go beyond information, and that community-based social marketing approaches can help overcome barriers and go beyond information. And there's lots on the web about community-based social marketing. I put a link at the end. And so these, and so what I want to say is you could take a whole semester long class on community-based social marketing. But these are kind of tactics that help people overcome some of these barriers. And so I'll list kind of a few tactics. But for example, around motivation and commitment, there's the idea that people can make public commitments, and that helps them kind of commit to behavior change and encourage and motivates them to make a behavior change, right? Because a lot of this is socially enforced. And so they've found that, people making verbal commitments, group commitments, or public pledges, there's the idea of a foot in the door, where it is this understanding of just getting people to do one thing. We often think we think of as being a what we call a gateway action, in the sense of, you get them to commit to one thing, and then they get kind of a good feeling from that, or they see the benefits of that, and they kind of proceed to the next step, right? You can kind of usher them in. There's in addition to pledges, there's a lot of research now on social norming. Social norms are the kind of shared rules that we all have that rule our behaviors, and they're not written rules. Quite often they're very informal rules, and they're things like, oh, okay, on Wednesdays I see all my neighbors pull their blue recycling bins to the sidewalk, and I'm going to do that too, right? And everybody's doing that because we all recycle. And so things like using bills to tell people how much energy, this is O Power, where they tell, you used this much energy, you use less than your efficient neighbors, you used about half as much as all your neighbors, you're doing great, right? But it's this idea of okay, you're better here, you're better than the norm, right? And the norm, and kind of telling people how they're doing in comparison to others, but also sharing that okay, other people care about the environment, other people act to conserve or reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. The kind of famous study around this is a social psychologist ran a study where he had one sign that just said, please do not steal or take anything from this national park, right? And then, but when you say that and you put that sign up there, it kind of makes it sound like a lot of people are stealing and taking things from the national park, right? And so in the other, the other sign said something more like 95% of people do not touch, leave our resources where they're supposed to be, right? And conveying that the norm here is to conserve and to preserve the environment. Other, things you can use are prompts. Prompts are meant like when people have already made the commitment or have, some education, some information about it, but then they need the reminder. And I actually always say this because I grew up running water to brush my teeth. Like it was never anything I thought of. And I literally just need a sign, once I became aware that, oh, that's unnecessary and a waste of water. But it's such a habit that it's like, I just need a sign there that's like, don't run the water while, brushing your teeth, right? And just they're immediate, they should be short, they should be, just like, hey, remember, turn off the lights as you leave, right? There's incentives to help overcome those first cost issues and those resource issues, right? So you probably see these, but these are rebates for, if you buy Energy Star, these are often funded by system benefits charges that you pay on your electricity that then come back to run programs to help everybody save energy. And then there's kind of more persuasive communication. Obviously, I said information isn't enough, but also on the idea of like helping to motivate people. There's a lot of research being done on how you motivate people, the use of fear appeals, right? Which is like, we're killing the polar bears or ruining the world, but and we know that fear appeals actually, it's not the worst thing. It can be motivating. But it has to be followed with information about what people can do to address that fear, right? So you want to give very specific actions, and you want them. That's partly why you want to be choosing behaviors that are going to really reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because you don't want people kind of doing just things that aren't going to make a difference. If you're going to kind of raise a fear and kind of try to motivate them to act through that, you then want to give them things and ways to really make a difference. Which leads me to my last point, which is I'd also encourage you to think about how you encourage collective action in your community behavior change programs, or as you're trying to get people to change behaviors. What becomes very apparent from those barriers we discussed is that these really limit individual actions, and that they need to be addressed collectively, often through new policies, through kind of public infrastructure, right? This is why a lot of climate change stuff, was going to go into programs through the federal government that are infrastructure programs, right? Because building that you need bike lanes if you want people to bike, or safe walking, safe sidewalks, that you want charging stations. So I had this picture because this is where I live, in Highlands, New Jersey. And we were very excited to see our town on the Super Bowl ad. And she drives over the bridge and she comes here, and then she's charging her electric vehicle, and there's no charger there. And it would be in a flood zone if it was there. But that the town then said, oh, we don't have any electric chargers in town, we should do that, right? But that it needs to be done through a town process. And so that encouraging people to do I have, yes, there we go. Giving people the kind of targets and knowledge and skills and competencies to undertake collective action is another way that you can help people address climate change in kind of a bigger way, right? So helping people know what policies would help at their town or state or national level, providing them knowledge about public meetings as far as kind of social norms, right? Like, or kind of giving people, making plans to attend meetings together, and talking about what points you're going to raise or to speak about. Many groups, right, provide templates for writing letters, help giving people the contact, information for the representatives they need to contact, right? All those pieces arm people with the ability to act together to get some of these bigger changes made that make the individual actions easier for people to take to address climate change. And so that's kind of the last thing I would encourage students and teachers to think about if they're thinking about changing behavior to address climate change. And I think so with that, there's a couple of references here. If any of you want these papers, you can write to email me. I think probably they both might be available online. I know the first one I'm pretty sure is available for free. And also the community-based social marketing.com website is pretty good, has lots of good case studies, lots of examples. And so with that, with that, I'm happy to open it up for questions, and people can chat their questions or just ask them. There's not so many people here that it's worried if you just ask them.
Zoom, we're in Zoom webinar, so we can't do unmuting, but yes,
okay.
Definitely everyone can feel free to write any questions in the chat. I think it would also be interesting to hear if anyone has done any of these behavior changes that Rachel talked about today. So feel free to kind of, let us know if there's anything that you changed in your life to kind of be more sustainable or to address climate change. While people are doing that, Rachel, if you want to stop sharing your screen, and I'll just kind of go over some of the stuff that's coming up with the climate challenge, and we'll just wait for that to come up. So thank you so much. That was a really great rundown. Really excited to see if students do a lot of these types of awareness campaigns. I think it's a really great project. So coming up for the climate challenge, we have some more student sessions. So we have one coming up tonight that's all about idling. Rachel did mention, that you could do an anti-idling campaign. So we can go further in depth in that tonight. It'll be very interesting. That's at 7 p.m. The next day, tomorrow, we have a student's guide to electric vehicles, which was also mentioned today, right? So that'll be at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Then we have some other ones coming up around food waste and composting. And we have our PD sessions. So this week we'll have integrating climate change into your curricula. So that will be really interesting for teachers to hear, how they can address that. This right here, like Andrea has shared the bit.ly link, this can all be found on our website at that link. So we have teacher guides, just like a really in-depth guide on how to guide your students in, creating their project. And then we have a student guide as well. Just things like official rules, the consent and release forms for when you want to do the challenge. And then we have like a brochure. Brochures are really good for sharing with other people that you think might be interested in this. And this is just a reminder for teachers to register to stay informed. Registration does not mean that you have to turn in a project, but it will mean that you get all of these resources that we are giving out throughout. And this is just a quick reminder of how to stay in touch with Sustainable Jersey. We have a specific email for this project as well. So NJ Student Climate Challenge at sustainablejersey.com. And you can use that email to connect with me, Renee, or Andrea. And then right here, you see all of our socials, and we'll have all of our like upcoming sessions, as well as like when we announce the winners and that type of thing. You'll see all of that on our social media accounts. So we do have some activity in the chat. So Rachel, we have a question. Can students be effective messengers? Oh, let me stop sharing, sorry. Can students be effective messengers for nudging forward these social norms or collective action around climate change? How so from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, students can definitely be effective messengers, and we talk about one of the things being when you're kind of on that idea of persuasive communication or, just delivering basic information to people about, why they might want to change their behavior and what they should do, that, the idea is that trusted messengers, people, that Al Gore telling a bunch of Republicans to save energy is not like, they just dismiss that, right? And so you want somebody, who people identify with. And so certainly students can play that role in their communities, and in their families even, right? And so I'm thinking of a study that actually was done that was really interesting, where there was the Girl Scouts ran like our program through the troops, right, of kind of saving energy, and kind of, so the girls were involved in understanding what saves energies and what actions to take, and they did all kinds of work and experiments and kind of activities around that. And then the study actually documented, right, that these kids went home and talked to their families about it, and they actually documented energy savings in those households, right, of like actual reductions in energy use. And so that's certainly one way. And we know this because we know things like I think it's probably less common now, but growing up it would be like kids learning about how bad smoking is for you, and then going home and like stealing your parents' cigarettes and like hiding them or dumping them down the toilet and all these things, right? And so students have a role in that, and particularly in their, so I said communities, in their own schools, and so their own schools, where they have some ownership in what happens every day, and kind of helping there. So Mark is just writing that it's not information and knowledge, but how these changes affect their time and money. Yeah, certainly. Well, it's a good debate in social psychology, and because I work with some folks who say that money isn't necessarily as powerful a driver of all these behaviors as we think. But I think the way I think about it is that it's a very significant aspect of decision making for many people, and so certainly making the case of how greenhouse gas emissions reductions and conserving resources aligns with saving money, and to the extent that it can save time, and obviously developing programs where it's not a huge drain on people's time or resources is a kind of big piece of helping people change their behavior. So I think that's certainly a big piece of the problem.
Great, thank you. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions, but we do have a lot of great resources that were shared in the chat, specifically focused on how students have influenced the opinions and beliefs of their parents towards climate change, which is really exciting. So for all the students out there, you can make a difference, and it's been shown in many studies, so that's really cool. So thank you so much, Rachel, for being here today, and thank you everyone for joining us. And we hope to see you at some of the upcoming sessions, and we hope to see your projects for those that are putting them out. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Thanks. Take care.
Bye.